We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project, the radio show discussing honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan back with Pat on this edition of Rising and reflecting on Tiny Dancer's tenure as mayor of Chicago on this edition in part, and obviously looking ahead at what the mayoral race could be now. And what it will be, perhaps. But Tiny Dancer's accomplishments, they're many and varied. Let's see, highest black unemployment of any major city in the country. Higher debt per capita than Detroit before bankruptcy. Obviously, the violent crime rate, murder rate, higher than L.A. and New York combined, with 1/4 of the population. It's just staggering. Let's see, you got police and fire pension funds circling the drain. You got a sex abuse scandal in CPS.
Are those the valleys that he was talking about? Remember the peaks and the valleys? Mm-hmm. Those are the valleys, right?
I don't know. I mean, that's for him to define. Who am I to define those for him? He's the person who recruited superstars for these important civic institutions like K through 12 education. Superstars like Barbara Byrd Bennett, who's in federal prison right now. Superstars like Forrest Claypool, who had to resign under an ethics cloud himself. Boys, there's so much to go over. And here's the good news. There is still a full 7 months for him to add to these accomplishments. And he's attempting to. He is pursuing a $10 billion bond scheme to stave off end of days for those police and fire pension funds I mentioned, both of which are less than 25% funded. And for more on this topic, what this accomplishment could mean for Chicago and first responders' pensions, we're pleased to be joined by Ted Dobrowski, president of WirePoints, wirepoints.com. Ted, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good morning.
So borrowed $10 billion. Gosh, I love this the first time 15 years ago when Blagojevich did it, and look at how much that has done to alleviate Illinois of its unfunded pension liability. So why not do it again at the city level?
Well, yeah, what it does is when you borrow lots of money and just shove it into a pension fund and act like you did something, what it does is it deflates any real attempts at reforming the pensions, and that's exactly what happened when Blago did it. You throw in $10 billion into something, you act like you fixed it, and you ignore it. But the fact of the matter is, everything that was wrong with it before is still there. It just keeps getting worse, and so that's the big sin about this thing. But of course, there's a lot of sins in this $10 billion idea that Rahm has. That's just one of them.
Ted, my understanding is that this is a very skeletal plan that was presented to the aldermen. It reminded me a little bit of Bud Fox's plan to turn around Blue Star Airlines. It's like a 3-point plan that doesn't mean anything. Why the lack of detail? What is the detail behind it, and does it have any chance of offering any hope in defraying some of these long-term costs?
Yeah, it offers no hope. It's all just a typical game. It's a kick the can game. It's a scoop and toss of borrowing more money now to hope you repay it in the future, and it's really a gamble with taxpayers' money. It's all of those things in one shot. And what Rahm gave to the alderman was this really skinny handout saying, look, we're going to refinance our debt. We're going to save billions. He said we could save up to $6 billion. There would be no tax hikes needed in the near future, or reduce the amount of tax hikes maybe, and everything will be better with pensions. And really none of that is true. Yes, the pension fund will be slightly better off, or it will be better off, but the hoodwinking involved in that, none of that is true. All in the end you're doing is you're borrowing $10 billion. You're going to try to pay it back way, way far into the future, and then you're going to throw it into the stock market and hope you make more money off the investments than it costs you to pay the interest. And if, we said it's heads I win, tails you lose for Rahm. If he makes lots of money off of it, he'll act like he did great. And if it loses, right, if they lose in the stock market, they'll just, taxpayers will pay more.
Is Warren Buffett running their pension plan? How do they make the decision that they're going to outpace the purveyors of the interest rates in the stock market? How can you possibly make that bet? All that is gambling. How do they sell that? How do they get that passed?
Well, so he didn't even sell it as a gamble. He just said we're going to refinance our debt with cheaper debt. They call the pension debt like debt when it's really not. It's this crazy thing that grows every year by billions. They never have control of it. So it's not true that it's the refinancing pension debt. And when he says that they'll save billions and there won't be tax hikes, they've presented just enough to let the aldermen think that this is a good deal. And if the aldermen don't want to ask any questions and don't want to challenge, then they can just go off of this thing and vote for it. And, if it goes wrong later, they can blame Rahm, 5 years from now.
Could you and the folks over at Wire Points turn this into like an extra normal or Ren and Stimpy style cartoon so that it could be explained in such a way that aldermen and the public would understand exactly what the implications of yet one more borrowing scheme in a state with $250 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, in a city with $30 billion in unfunded police and fire pension liabilities actually means?
Yeah, well, again, we did a little hand of, Rahm flipping the coin. He's going to Vegas, right? He's going to bet with the money. Now that Rahm's not running, it's a little unclear as to how to think about this, but I will give you my thoughts on that. But there is actually, instead of that, Dan, there's a way to improve this thing, and my partner wrote about that today. If you're going to make the pension funds, the fire pension fund and police pension fund, dramatically better by shoving, a big chunk of the $10 billion in there, shouldn't the city council be asking for huge concessions or some reforms in the pension plans going forward? Not for benefits that have been earned, but for benefits that haven't been earned. This is a great opportunity to use that leverage to say, if we're going to give you that much money, we want serious reforms to fix this problem. It's a huge opportunity and one that's being wasted, and neither Rahm nor the city council is thinking about how to take advantage of that.
Isn't it, Ted? Isn't it being wasted intentionally, though? Because they don't want to take on those union representatives. They don't want to take, that's their potentially big part of their constituency.
Well, that's exactly right, but that's exactly what's wrong with Chicago politics for the last, however many decades, is that, nobody's using the leverage they have to force better fiscal choices, right? And they're just kicking the can down the road, which brings up, I think, the interesting point of this whole deal. Rahm, if Rahm's not running, he desperately needs this deal to pass, because if what he doesn't want is there to be a major crisis, a collapse, when the stock market collapses or when the economy slows down, where Chicago gets into deep, deep trouble. Right? We're talking about bankruptcy. He wants to push that crisis as far away into the future so they can't peg it on him, and that's what this $10 billion thing would do. It'd just be a huge can kick, and maybe save his butt from catching all the grief for the collapse of Chicago.
And one of the other flim-flam points you mentioned is the Tiny Dancer suggests that this would prevent the need for tax increases in the future. Explain why that is not true.
So what happens is, here's how they would try to do that, right? They'll borrow the $10 billion, and what they'll do, and which is what they did with the Blago bond, they'll push the repayment of that bond far into the future. We're talking 30 years ahead, right? So that debt is falling on your kids and grandkids, et cetera. And then what they'll do is they'll push the money into the pension funds, and of course reduce the amount of money needed for pension funds now. But in the end, Chicagoans are still on the hook for all that money. It's just that they've can kicked it enough such that you push the tax hikes away, but you haven't eliminated the tax hikes. You've just borrowed more money and made things worse in the end. It's all a hoodwinking.
Is there anybody, the only person that I've really seen so far running for mayor who's laid out some detail in his plans is Paul Vallas, and of course he doesn't fancy himself, I shouldn't say it that way, pejoratively. He portrays himself as a green eye shades budget guy, a guy who looks at balance sheets and asks, where's the money coming from, where's the money going? But nobody really wants to tackle at the state or city level, it seems, this pension problem because of the entrenched interest you'd have to take on. And even Vallas, a budgeteer, if we can see the point, his wife is a copper. He's got two sons that are Chicago cops. So what's his appetite for any of this?
Well, I think he'll recognize, and he's called it out, and that it's a game. It's another, just the typical things that we do in Chicago to play kick the can down the road. But I think what you're going to see is we're going to have another cycle of this kind of game, but with the Chicago and police fire funds at 20-something% funded, it's going to, at some point, it's going to behoove the actual members of the police and fire funds to actually come and ask for reforms, because it's going to get to the point where there's no money there. So if nobody wants to do anything about it, nobody wants to take them on, we're going to get to that point where it's insolvent anyway, and then something's going to happen. It's going to be ugly when it happens that way, because it won't be a controlled plan. It's going to be a kind of a bankruptcy solution plan.
He is Ted Dobrowski, president of WirePoints, wirepoints.com, where you can get great original commentary and analysis on all of the financial public policy challenges facing Chicago and the state of Illinois. Ted, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.